Hello, hello, hello. Peace and power and elevation be to all of you. What's going on? What's happening? This your girl Tiffany coming through here live in effect. Today I'm going to be on the topic about a former gangster who was a Trey Crip out of South Central LA, which is now called South LA. He has wrote an autobiography about his life, which I have right here in front of me. And he went by the name Muster Cody. His name, the name that he adopted was Sanyika Shakur. So he adopted the name Shanika Shakur, or is it Sanyika? How you say it? It's Sanyika Shakur. Okay, I was right the first time. Yeah, he adopted that name when he was incarcerated because he studied about revolutionary and studied about the history of those who were revolutionaries, and he wanted to get away from the lifestyle. So he changed his name from Monster Cody to the name that I mentioned before. And um, but he would get incarcerated again in 2007, and it wouldn't be until around 2018 that he ended up getting out of prison, I believe. However, just 3 years after he was released, um, he had sadly passed away on June the 6th of 2021. So Monster Cody left his legacy not only being known as a Crip, but as a best-selling author. So I want to show you guys the title of the book. So if you guys never got this book yet, I would advise you all to get it. I would advise you all to get this book. The name of it is called The Autobiography of an LA Gang Member, Monster. So yeah, I just got this book, and I've read some of the chapters in here. So far he goes into his life growing up in LA, and how he got involved in the gang at a very young age of 11, and from when he committed his first crime to prove his loyalty to his sect. And he also talks about the internal conflict between the Crips, from the Rolling 60 Crips and the 8 Trey Crips. And then he goes on to talk about the conflict of the Bloods. Um, he has a lot to talk about now. He wrote this while he was incarcerated. And again, it became a best-selling book. So this book came out in 1993. All right. Okay. So, anyways, I want to go into the life about Monster Cody and what inspired me to do so, because I have heard this man's story before in the past. I happened to even seen a video about it, and I thought that it was just pretty interesting for someone like him who have made a transition from being a part of a notorious gang to becoming a revolutionary and trying to make that transition in his life. Many people who have been put in his predicament weren't fortunate enough to leave the gang life. They weren't fortunate enough to get out of it. They Most of the time they'll encounter death before they even get a chance to see freedom in their lifetime. So, however, the question is surrounding how his death came about, because he died at the age of 57. And so there's not enough information regarding to whether it had something to do with a murder or something to do with his health condition. Nobody really knows. So it happened just recently. But he lived long enough to tell his story. And he been around long enough. So he said he was influenced by people like Tookie Williams, who was also a Crip, one of the founders of the Crips, and From there, he went on to build a brand, build his recognition, and have a reputation for himself. So what I'm going ahead and do is I'm going to look at his biography. That's the first thing I'm going to do. But before I get there, let me show you guys a picture of him. This picture right here, this is a picture of Cody Scott. Okay, Monster Cody. That's a picture of him in his later years. All right, so let's go into his biography. All right. So according to the Wiki One or Wikipedia website, Sanyika Shakur, who was born Kody DeJohn Scott on November 13, 1963. He died on June 6, 2021. He was known by his former street moniker, Monster or Monster Cody, and was a member of the Los Angeles gang, the A-Trade Gangster Crips. Okay. He got his nickname as a 13-year-old gang member when he beat and stomped a robbery victim until he was disfigured. Shakur claimed to have reformed in prison, joined the Republic of New Africa movement, and wrote a 1993 memoir called Monster, the Autobiography of an LA Gang Member. Okay, so Monster describes how Shakur was drawn into gang life, his experiences as a gangster, both on the street and in prison, and eventually his transformation into a black nationalist. Shakur spent 36 months at St. Quentin State Prison and 5 years at Pelican Bay State Prison, most of which was spent in solitary confinement, where he converted to Islam. In March of 2007, Shakur, already sought by police for parole violation and named on the city's most wanted gang members list, was arrested by the Los Angeles Police Department for allegedly breaking into the home of an acquaintance and beating him in order to steal his car. The charges represent a possible third strike that could send Shakur back to prison for life. In May 2008, Shakur pleaded no contest to the carjacking and robbery charges and was sentenced to 6 years in state prison. Also in 2008, Shakur made his fishing debut with the publication of Thug Life, Grove Atlantic Books. He was released from Pelican Bay after serving 2/3 of his 6 years 6 year sentence in August of 2012. So actually he got out of prison in 2012. Right. So he was born in Los Angeles, California, to Ernest Scott and Bertie Canada from Houston, Texas. Cody was the fifth of 6 children, including 4 brothers and 2 sisters: Kevin, Kim, Kervin, Kershawn, Cody, and Candace. Shakur believed it was probable that he was the son of former LA or Los Angeles Rams running back Dick Bass, and that he was conceived during an adulterous affair that his mother was having with the football star, a claim for which there is no compelling evidence. Ernest Scott held a bitter resentment towards Bertie's affair and physically abused his wife regularly throughout Shakur's early childhood. Ernest Scott physically, emotionally abused Cody, routinely beating him and showing deliberate favoritism towards his biological children over Shakur, which included taking the other children out to dinner, movies, and trips to his hometown of Houston, and intentionally leave Shakur behind. In 1970, Ernest and Bertie Scott divorced, and for the next 5 years, Ernest Scott would visit the family on weekends, but still displayed contempt for young Shakur. In 1972, Bertie Scott moved her family into a house on West 69th Street and Dinker Avenue in a very rough and gang-infested neighborhood on the west side of South Central LA. According to Shakur, his first encounter with street gangs occurred at age 10 when he was assaulted by two 13-year-olds who stole his money. Because Bertie worked several jobs to support her large family as well as the neglect that he received from Ernest Scott, young Shakur would often hang out on the streets of his new neighborhood. It was around this time that he began hanging around his neighbor, Stanley Tookie Williams, the leader of the West Side Crip's street gangs. In his memoir, Blue Rage, Black Redemption, Tookie Williams recalled the occasions in which he and other adults members of the Crip would smoke PCP and lift weights at Williams' house. According to Williams, Shakur was always present at the house and would watch in awe as the gang members would lift weights and tell stories about gang fights and shootings that they had committed. In the book, Williams also expressed his regret regarding his behavior around the impressionable young Shakur, and he held himself personally responsible for exposing Shakur to drugs, as Shakur himself would later become a frequent PCP user. So stop right there. Imagine being a child and you thinking that one of your parents is your biological parent. But then there's speculation there's a possibility that you could be belong to someone else. And that parent finds out that one of your parents done had an affair and had you outside of the wedlock. Now, it's very funny to me. Well, I wouldn't say funny, but it's very odd to me that, when these men have relations with other women and outside their marriage, then it has to be acceptable to the woman. She deals with that and she doesn't lead the family or get upset about it or whatever. But let it be the woman, reverse psychology, let it be the woman who decides to have a relationship or an affair with someone else and have a child. Then that man that's in the marriage leaves the family. It don't want to have, he just totally abandons the whole entire family because of that one mistake that she made, which was having a kid with someone else. And there is no forgiveness involved in that. There's grudges, there's anger, there's resentment. And so the woman is left to just raise the rest of the children on her own because she done had a child. She done had one child by another man. But you got men who have sexual relation with other women and have multiple children, and the wife is expected to stay. And see, this is where it brings the conflict of, this is where the debate comes in between men and women. Well, if a man cheats on his wife and had kids, the woman shouldn't just up and leave. She should just stick around. But if the woman cheats on her husband and have kids, he ain't got to have nothing to do with her, and he can just leave her alone because she for the streets. It just brings these conflicts. These conflicts brings the dichotomy and brings the double standards. So it was said to be that Cody Scott was born out of what they call, what he was happened to be what they call the love child. So that's an old terminology, meaning that if your parents done had an affair and you come into the picture, right? So he was the love child. He never knew his biological father. He heard that his biological father was a football player, but they had no way of proving that. So that left a void in him because the man that he looked up to as a dad, who was his stepfather, he basically disowned him, said, you know what, fuck you. You ain't none of my kid. Why I gotta take on responsibility for you? Fuck you. I'm coming to see my biological kid. I don't care nothing about that little boy. You better go find his daddy. That was the attitude that his stepfather portrayed on him. And it made him feel like, well, damn, if you gonna do me like that, well, then who else am I supposed to look up to? I can't just look up to my mother. So that's why he turned to the street, because he was looking for the father figure, because he couldn't get that father figure from his stepdad, because his stepdad pretty much abandoned him, and it wasn't much his mother can do about it. So, and nobody knew where his biological father was at. So he just went on ahead and turned to the street. And this is a story of a lot of young men. They grow up without fathers. And when they have stepfathers around, sometimes stepfathers treat them like they're a piece of shit. And they're left to deal with the burden alone. So they feel like, well, where do I fit in? Where can I find a father? So for him, he turned to the Crips. And they became his father. They became his family. It wasn't that he abandoned his mother. He loved his mom. But because of her action and what she did, it caused a breakdown in the family. So he felt like, well, this is all I know. I mean, I'm around them every day, 24/7. Why not? Why not join the gang? Why not get involved? Why not? I mean, why not get initiated? Why not be in the rite of passage? This is the type of attitude that he had, and it stuck with him. So many of the kids are byproducts, so that they grew up around gang activities, or they live in a neighborhood that is gang infested, and what they see, they become very interested in it, and it becomes a part of them. So they become that product of their environment, and that's what happened with Shakur. He was the product of his environment. And anybody that knows about the history of LA, it's known for a lot of gang activities. It's known to be the homes of the Bloods and Crips. So you're gonna find areas where it's Crip infested, it's blood infested. You got this set of Bloods over here, you got this set of Crips over here. So it's like you can't really get away from it, because it's all around you. And you will find out that vast majority of African Americans that grew up in the inner city, they are initiated into these gangs because that's what they grew up around. It became a part of their culture. But let me go ahead and continue. So go further down. Joining the Crip in 1975, a member of the West Side Crips, nicknamed Sidewinder, formed a set called the 8 Trade Gangster Crips, also known as 83GC, ETG, or ETGC in Shakur's neighborhood. On the evening of June 15th of 1975, the day of his 16th, the day of his 6th grade graduation, Cody was initiated into the ETGs. Shakur was courted into the gang, also known as being jumped in which gang members beat up the new recruit to see if he or she is brave enough to fight back and defend himself or herself. Shakur and another gang member then hotwired a stolen car, after which he and several members of the ETGs, all armed with revolvers and shotguns, tracked down members of the Brims street gang, a set of the Bloods, which had been hanging out in the Crips neighborhood. The ETGs opened fire on a group of approximately 15 Brims, shooting several of them. Shakur, armed with a sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun, and instructed not to return to the car unless he used all 8 rounds of the weapon, shot several Brims gang members that evening. All right, so disfiguring an older black man. So before I go there, I want to read something from his book. So in his book right here, he wrote, for I had learned early that there were 3 stages of reputation to go through before the title of OG original gangster would apply righteously. First, you must build the reputation of your name, i.e., you as an individual. Second, you must build your name in association with your particular set so that when your name is spoken, your set is also spoken of in the same breath, for it is synonymous. And third, you must establish yourself as a promoter of Crip or blood, depending, of course, on which side of the color bar you live. So that's the step that you had to go through in order to be considered as an OG, according to Cody's Shakur. You had to build your reputation. You have to build your name in the association, and you have to establish yourself as a promoter. Build reputation, build your name in the association, and establish yourself as a promoter. And that's what he learned. So let me go ahead and go back to the article. It says disfiguring an older black man. As a new member of the Crips, Shakur was mentioned in the ways of a gang banging by Trey Ball. In 1977, at age 13, Shakur and Trey Ball attempted to rob an older African-American man who was walking through their neighborhood. The man punched Shakur in the face, and after being physically restrained by Trey Ball when he attempted to run, was kicked and stomped by Cody for approximately 20 minutes. Cody's vicious attack left the man in a coma with his face permanently disfigured. According to Shakur, Crip's present at the crime scene overheard police officers saying that whoever assaulted the man was a monster and reported this back to him. From that point on, other members of the ETGs referred to Shakur as Monster, and he took the name as Monster as a street moniker. All right. The first arrest for shooting. Shakur's first arrest occurred in 1978 at the age 14 after he shot at the employees of a fast food restaurant who had assaulted his younger brother, Kershawn, and later assaulted and pulled a gun on Shakur. Kershawn Scott later joined the 8 Trays and assumed the nickname Little Monster. A week after being released from jail, Shakur was arrested again after being falsely accused of shooting a member of the Inglewood family Bloods when he and other members of the Crips were on their way to a roller skating ring in Compton, California. On February 14, 1979, Shakur was arrested for assault and grand theft auto and served 9 months at Count Munns in Lake Hughes, California. The rivalry between the 8 Trays and the Rolling 60s, the beginning of Crip on Crip violence. So this is what he was discussing inside his book. During the Shakur stay at Count Munns, several major events occurred on the streets of South Central Los Angeles that involved the Crips. On March the 15th, 1979, the West Side Crips leader Stanley Tookie Williams was arrested for murders committed during 2 separate robberies while on an alleged drug ping to his death. Williams steadfastly denied committing the murders. Williams was sentenced to death row and executed by lethal injection on December 13th of 2005. And on August 9, 1979, Raymond Washington, the founders of the Crips, was murdered in a drive-by shooting near his home. Because Raymond Washington always made it a point never to walk up to cars, it was determined that his killers were people he knew personally, since he had walked up to the murderer's car and had a conversation with them prior to being shot. Washington's murder was blamed on the Hoover Crips, now known as the Hoover Criminals or Hoover Gang, which started a war between the East Side Crips and the Hoovers. and shooting and hospitalization. Shakur, along with his best friend, uh, Daltrey Crazy D Denard, were deeply involved in this gang war and were responsible for shooting and assaulting dozens of members of the Rolling 60s. On December the 31st of 1980, 16 years old, Shakur was ambushed and shot 6 times by 3 adult members of the Rolling 60s after being set up by a group of girls who were dating friends on his set. Perhaps what saved his life was the fact that earlier that evening, Cody had been drinking a cheap brand of low-end forfeit wine called the ETGs as the gang celebrated New Year's Eve, and the level of inebriation that Shakur was under at the time of the shooting prevented him from going into shock. After being shot, Shakur reported having hallucination of seeing the faces of all the gang members he had shot since joining the Crips, as well as seeing the infant daughter that he had with his girlfriend Tamu. Shakur survived the shooting and was hospitalized for several weeks. Shakur's younger brother Kashan, who was by now a member of the Eight Trays and nicknamed Little Monster, sought vengeance for his older brother's shooting. On New Year's Day, 1981, Kashan and several teenage members of the ETGs committed a string of retaliatory shootings. Kashan shot 2 teenagers who were standing in the front yard at a house party that was being thrown in the Rolling 60s neighborhood, and later that evening shot another teenager to death in a drive-by as the young man was walking down the street. Kashan was later arrested and sentenced to 5 years in California Youth Authority for murder as a juvenile. While recovering in the hospital, Shakur's assailants from the Rolling 60s came to the hospital in an attempt to finish him off due to the intervention of a nurse who was attending to him. However, Shakur was unharmed. When he was released from the hospital, he continued gang banging and would spend the remainder of the 1980s in and out of the penal system for numerous violent offenses. So not only he was a Crip, but he was a Crip from the West Side, and he was an A Tray Crip. So the A Trays opposition or ops was the Rolling 60s. So not only they was in ops with the Bloods or the Brims, but they was also in op with the Rolling 60s. See the internal conflicts between the Crips and the external conflicts with the Bloods. And it ain't just something that just started. It started when, of course, uh, the whole incident with Tookie Williams, and he's been accused of the crime of murder, and of course the killing of Raymond Washington. So that brought about the internal conflicts with the Crips. So you might think that, oh well, if they all are Crips, wouldn't they all be on the same page? No. Just because they are under one branch doesn't mean that they all gonna be on the same page. This is why you have the subset of Crips, okay? And those subsets may not get along with other set. They may not get along with each other. So just like you got a set of Bloods, right? You got the Bloods, but then under the Bloods you got a different set, and those various sets may not get along with each other. It happens. Internal conflicts take place. So if we look into the history and origins about different groups and organizations and different societies, right? How they live under one umbrella, but guess what? They are a different set of groups under that umbrella, and they don't always work together or get along. There are always come time of conflicts. All right, and it goes down to talking about his name changing to Sanyika Shakur. So while he was in prison in 1980, he befriended with the members of the Republic of New Africa movement. Shakur, who dropped out of high school, began to educate himself in prison. He changed his name to Sanyika Shakur and began changing his viewpoint regarding his role in the plight of Black people in the United States of America after being released from prison in 1988. Cody married his longtime girlfriend, Tamu. And in 1991, Cody was arrested for the assault and grand theft auto after beating up a crack dealer who was working as a police informant and stealing the dealer's van. Shakur was incarcerated during the 1992 Los Angeles riots that occurred after the acquittal of the 4 police officers accused of beating Rodney King following a traffic stop. The beating of white truck driver Reginald Denny was committed by members of the ETGs in Shakur's neighborhood. This event, as well as participating in Leon Bean's book Do or Die, inspired Cody to write his book Monster, the autobiography of an LA gang member. Then also it talks about his friendship with Tupac Shakur. So in the early 1990s, Cody, now calling himself Sanyika Shakur, he met Tupac Shakur. The two became friends, and Shakur mentioned Tupac in the introduction of his book in 1996. As Shakur was on the run from the police for a parole violation, he met up with Tupac on the set of the S-rated version of Tupac's music video, How Do You Want It? This will be the last time that Cody will ever see Tupac. So on September 13, 1996, Tupac Shakur died after being shot in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas, Nevada, 7 days earlier, allegedly by members of the Southside Compton Crips. Cody would later interview Tupac's alleged murderer, Orlando Anderson, for a December 1997 Vibe magazine article about Tupac's murder, in which Anderson denied being involved in the rapper's murder. After being captured by police, Shakur was sent to Pelicans Bay State Prison, where Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight was also incarcerated for a parole violation that stemmed from his participation in the assault on Anderson. According to the Vibe magazine article, Shakur, upon hearing that Tupac had been shot, initially suspected that Suge Knight had set him up because Tupac was planning to leave Death Row to start his own record label. Now, regard to the whole death around Tupac Shakur, it has been speculated for a long period of time that Suge Knight had something to do with that, because a lot of people was leaving his record label. So many people was leaving and they was moving on. I mean, Dr. Dre ended up leaving his record label and started his own record, which was called Aftermath, and many others, because they felt like Suge was not fulfilling his promise. He wasn't making sure they getting paid and none of that. And then, of course, Snoop Dogg had to end up leaving, going to No Limit, because he wasn't getting paid by Suge Knight. You know what I'm saying? So that's another thing too. Artists in the music industry, just because they have fame doesn't mean they have the fortune. So Tupac had the fame at the time, he had the recognition, but he did not have the fortune. He didn't have the money when he was alive. Yeah, he might have been giving a little money here and there, and Suge might have gave him some jewelries to wear or bought him a car and all of that. But as far as having money in his pocket, money on his own, he didn't have that. He wasn't making that kind of money. All that money that was coming off his records, it was going to Suge Knight. It wasn't going to Tupac Shakur's pocket. So it could be a possibility. I'm not saying that it is true, but it could be a possibility, because Tupac was, starting his own thing. He had the Machiavelli, he had the Outlaws, he had different artists on his team. So he was focusing on building his own brand. So that's probably what that part got Suge a little jealous, like, oh, you starting your own brand, so were you trying to outshine me? That type of thing. You know how it goes when you get into the industry. You got people who are greedy, and if somebody who's always bringing in the income, who's always the commodity. If they decide that they're going to leave and move on, then they messing up the revenue of the person that has promoted them or that has put them on, because they broke the contract and they don't want to have anything to do with them anymore. They decide to move on, be independent. So yeah, I mean, it could be a possibility, but who knows? All right. But anyway, after hearing Knight's claim that Tupac died owing him money, despite selling over $60 million worth of albums for Death Row Records, and that he knew that all of Tupac's possession, including his home and his cars, was in Knight's name. At the end of the interview, Knight told Shakur that Orlando Anderson was indeed the person who killed Tupac. Orlando Anderson was killed on May 29th, 1998 in an unrelated shooting. All right, so he was incarcerated again on March of 2007 for a parole violation, and he was wanted as the gang member on the list, arrested by the LAPD, and of course he was charged. The charges represented a possible third strike that could send Shakur back to prison for life. So that whole three strike shootout came out in the 90s. So basically, it's a law that if you get locked up the third time, that's the end of it. You are sentenced to life. Period. So anybody know about the three strike laws? Yeah, that law back then was very strict. So if you got locked up the third time, that was it. That was final. Get out of here. So, and it said he pleaded no contest on May of 2008 to the carjacking and robbery, and he was sentenced 6 years in state prison. Okay. It says in November of 2013, Shakur published a book of essays titled Stand Up, Struggle Forward, New African Revolution, Writings on Nation, Class, and Patriarchy. And on June 10th of 2017, Shakur was sent back to prison for an assault conviction out of San Diego County. He was incarcerated at Santanilla State Prison in Imperial, California, and was later released on parole. But unfortunately, on June the 6th of 2021, Shakur was found deceased in a tent in a homeless encampment in Oceanside, California. His cause of death is pending investigation. So he was found dead inside of a tent where, a tent where the homeless people stay in Oceanside, California. Now, I have many questions regarding to that as to why would he be found dead inside of a tent? That's very suspicious. I happened to see his GoFundMe page that was set up by his loved ones. And the GoFundMe was, I guess they was trying to raise up about $30,000 for his funeral. And they haven't raised up much money as of yet. Now, this man been dead for almost 2 weeks. And there's a GoFundMe page. And it started to make me question some things. If this man was a very well-respected brother that was a Crip, a H trays at that, where is the unification? Why have not many brothers and sisters that are part of the Crip organization that he belonged to, why are they not stepping up and trying to come together and bring some revenue to help the family out? That's what I'm wondering. I mean, where are these big time stars that are Crips and they from California? Why have there not been anybody that's wealthy, that's a celebrity, that say, well, hey, let's come together and let's help the family out. So that way they wouldn't have to do a GoFundMe page. Let's help the family out. Let's pay for this man's funeral. And so that makes me wonder about his health condition. Did he have a serious bad health condition? Did he go into a state of destitution? There's so many question marks regarding to this man and his health and his death. Was there some form of destitution? Why did he end up in a homeless tent? And where are the remaining members of the Trade Crips? Why are many of them not coming together? Why does the family have to go and do a GoFundMe to get money raised for this man's death, for this man's funeral and his memorial service? Why do they have to go use a GoFundMe? I'm just curious. But I'm done. Anyways, that is all for today. That's the story about Master Cody. And may he rest in peace. May the ancestor be with him. And may many others who were all revolutionaries in their own rights rest in peace as well. So this one right here, to me, is pretty fascinating. Very interesting story because you're looking at somebody who had to go through the transitional process of being from the streets to being where they are as a revolutionary. It's not easy. It's not an easy transition. So he had to rebrand himself. He had to re-educate himself. He had to unlearn and relearn. He had to acquire various forms of knowledge. That's what he had to do. And he did all of this while he was incarcerated. Yep. But anyways, this your girl Tiffany. I'm out. And please make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and also share the video contents. Make sure you guys check out those videos that I have posted on here. I appreciate those who have been subscribed. Thank you so much. I am grateful for that. Until next time, I will talk to you guys later. All right. So this is your girl Tiffany, and I'm logging off. Peace.